This week, wildfires are helped, germinations hindered by dry conditions in Minnesota and North Dakota. Lack of parts availability forces some dealerships to rethink their mode of getting parts to farmers. A possible solution to grain bin entrapments. And a rocket from China comes home, a drone from China comes home to me, and Dave performs a cat rescue while out in the field with a drone. This is the Rural Reflections Podcast. Welcome to the Rural Reflections Podcast. We've got Rural Reflections West with Dave Nelson out in Carrington and Rural Reflections East with Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio. Dave, you know, we could dance around it, but we might as well just take it head on. It's dry outside. My word, it's dry outside. How about out in Carrington and western North Dakota? Is it pretty bad out there?
Yeah, we're extremely dry. As a matter of fact, I think North Dakota is probably, as a whole, about the driest it's ever been. Although yesterday, in the southwestern part of the state, about an inch of rain went through a good portion of it, half to an inch. And I think they're probably, they're traditionally a lot drier than we are. And they probably need it way worse than we do.
How about that Medora fire? Has that calmed down, Medora Part 2?
Yeah, I think so, and I'm guessing this rain, really settled it down. A ton of fires out in the western part, and, there's a lot of big areas of grass, pasture lands and stuff that aren't utilized for anything else but pasture, and it's probably a lot of it is federally owned land. I don't know, but there's been a ton of fires in that area. So.
And in case you folks didn't hear me put that on my coffee cup, this is the coffee portion, the coffee talk portion of the Rural Reflections Podcast. Dave, we had a fire out in west of Red Lake, about 20 miles. So that kind of borders up against eastern Pennington County, called the Goods Fire last week. And that was over 5,000 acres that was on fire there. And they brought in helicopters and dumped water. And I think they got it under control on Friday, as I believe. That one got under control too. But it seems like we got a red flag warning about every 2 or 3 days of 7 around here, which is really just a heightening of what we already have, which is restrictions. And of course, the fire restrictions or burning restrictions are as a result of our own drought that we've got going on here. If you go to northwestern Minnesota and then work your way southeast, it's all one variance of drought. Either it's moderately droughty or extremely drought or something along those lines. So we've got it going on out here. It's nice that everybody's getting everything planted. Not sure if it's all going to germinate right away, although I've seen some fields where you see a little bit of green coming up. How about out there?
There is. There's a little bit on there might be some wheel tracks, and it seems like the headlands of the fields, I suppose, are probably packed a little harder, and it seems like that is starting to show a little bit of fresh green color in it. We did have 28 hundredths of rain last week, but funny that you mentioned the red flag warning, because they never took the red flag warning off here, even after we'd had, almost a third of an inch of rain.
I always give people who like cats a little more leeway in how they act. And one of the most misunderstood guys, Roy Garber from Storage Wars, of course, he passed on here probably 5-6 years ago. One of his favorite phrases was, "A nickel's holding back a dollar." And it seems like in farm equipment and agriculture, got a little bit of that going on. I saw a story last week about an $8 sensor that put one farmer on the sidelines. He ended up having to go out and lease another tractor so he could get his crop in. And I know there's a lot going on with that. especially electrical parts, excuse me, being able to get those electrical parts and those being an issue sometimes out in the field. How has it gone out there in North Dakota?
Well, one of the most common things that I hear from farmers is, this tractor, someday there's going to be something electrical go wrong with it, and it won't be able to be fixed, and it'll just be sitting there. Everything will be fine on it, excepting some little electrical part will be holding me up. And I assure them, we've got things around. We can take care of that. We have good technicians that can take care of that. And now they're right. There are some things that are being held up for that. We have gone to extraordinary means to make sure people are able to go, and we don't actually have a machine sitting right now that can't operate just because I can't get a part for it. But we have borrowed parts, we have ordered used parts in some cases, and now that the pipeline of parts, electrical parts, it's primarily is the issue, but now that the pipeline is emptied out, the company is going to a different method of supporting us with parts, and that's telling us to hang on to our core parts, and instead of ordering new or replacement parts for them, send them in and have them repaired at our repair facility in Springfield, Missouri, and then sent back to us. Because if anybody sends in a core part and it goes in to be remanufactured, you'll never get it back. It'll just go into the general parts system. So that's the next thing. It's actually showing up as a substitution for a part when you go to order it. It says when no longer available, and they give you the return sheet, and you send the part in, and within a week you'll have your repaired piece back.
So there's a lot of there's a lot of technicians down in Springfield, Missouri, who are probably working a little overtime.
Yeah, probably, and maybe they're, maybe instead of just, they buy cores, they buy used things, so they have that to repair, and maybe they're out too, so maybe they're more than happy to get to be repairing these things. I don't know, but it's just another way of keeping things going, and it looks like we're going to get through the planting season without any big wounds. But it's scary to think that, it just takes one little piece. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's a little Facebook clip, and it's on YouTube and stuff, where they're parking all the pickups at the Kansas Motor Speedway, and they drive them out there, they park them, they pull the one chip that they have, and they're parked there waiting for a chip, and there's thousands of them sitting there. So it's having a big effect on things. Car dealer lots, you can tell that they're not full to the brim right now. Lots of dealers' lots are looking pretty thin. So I suppose for those that have stuff, it's a good thing, because people will want it and come to you no matter what, just because you have it. But it's kind of a scary situation.
Yeah, it is, definitely. I've heard a lot of automotive makers have focused their electronic parts on their higher end vehicles because they can make a little bit better money off of those, and they're leaving some of their further down the line vehicles unmade at this time. And it's not like you can break open a video game, take the chip out and pop it in, or you can't run a wire from one spot to the other and skip over the spot where the chip is supposed to be. It doesn't work that way. It's all part of a whole train of electrical impulses that have to go through a resistor at the right ohms to make everything else work. So it's an essential part. But like you said, Dave, I'm sure we're going to get through it. And, You know what? We're through the first half of the Rural Reflections podcast. Let's take a break. This is the Rural Reflections podcast. Welcome back to the Rural Reflections podcast. Dave Nelson out in Carrington, Grant Nelson here at the studios of Thief River Falls Radio. Dave, for every problem that comes along in agriculture, we seem to find a solution. And one long-running problem has been farmers getting caught in grain bins, sometimes requiring rescue, always requiring some kind of rescue. Sometimes they end up dying in those grain bins. That's been a problem that we've been working on for a long time. And I saw something that really caught my eye because I've seen a variety of things that they've come up with, including straps to kind of hold on to you if you fall into the grain, that sort of thing. But I think the real end game here on grain bin safety is just not to get in the grain bin in the first place. And of course, that's impossible if you've got clumps or you've got to do a little shoveling or something like that. But there's something that's come along now called the Grain Weevil. It's a robot that uses auger-based propulsion to move across the top of the grain. Now, the best way I can describe this is if anybody's seen those old tractors where they used to put an auger, replace the tires with a gearbox, and then they'd have an auger on each side of the tractor parallel to the body of the tractor, and then those augers would spin, and it would move the whole unit across the snow. And that's what this looks like. Now, the auger's a little bit more, well, it's a lot more aggressive than what we've seen on some of those old clips of tractor snowmobiles. That looks more like the beater on a manure spreader, a lot more aggressive. But with this kind of a unit, they claim they can break up crusts, level bins, do inspections, and help with extractions, so sweep augers work a little bit more efficiently. And right now, it's in the form of a remote controlled, and it's not even, I don't believe it's available commercially, but they do eventually want to make it run autonomously. So there, Dave, would be a helper on the farm that only has a one-time charge, and you never have to worry about them getting hurt in the grain bin.
Yeah, it sounds like a cool idea. I always wondered why they didn't make something like a silo unloader is,
Yep.
where it would go around the top and take the stuff off the top if it was bridged up in there, if it wouldn't move, But sounds like somebody's come up with a pretty handy little gadget there that'll help out with a lot of that problem.
When you talk about the silo unloader, that's a memory from the past that a lot of people probably don't remember unless you're of a certain age. And with the silo, you'd have a 60, 100-foot tall silo, and at the top, inside the silo, would be an auger that ran across the top and rotated and drug the silage into the middle, and then there was a blower that would kick it out the side of the silo into a chute that would come all the way down to the ground, and then Dave or I or Daryl or Steve or Dad would be there with a fork to fork it into a cart and go feed the cattle. That's a good concept for cleaning out grain bins. I hope this one works as well. You know what I mean?
I do too. It's anything to prevent that, because it's just, no matter how much they preach about it and no matter how many rescue means they come up with, and that somebody dies every year. There's always somebody.
That's the truth, and it's a huge loss for the community. Let's shuck right down to the cob here. A lot of farm communities aren't populated with a lot of people, and farmers, they're pretty much the backbone or part of the backbone of these agricultural communities. And you lose one of them, and it's usually you've lost a first responder on the ambulance crew or a volunteer fireman on the fire department. It's a big loss to the community. And of course, the greater the greater problem, of course, is just the loss of life, but it's still it has a ripple effect. Now, this weekend, I started adventuring out into something, Dave, that you've done a lot in the past, and that's doing mapping with a drone. I picked up a Phantom Pro 4 and went out this weekend, and it's a learning process. Let's call it a learning process. That's a good way to say it. I tried a couple of maps on the pasture, and that was pretty easy, not too big a deal. And then I went a couple miles away, and I was going to work on the Black River impoundment. But the problem was I hadn't closed out the first map from up on the pasture, or the last map I had done up on the pasture. So when I launched the drone, it grabbed that map instead of the current one that I had made for the impoundment, and it took off for home. Of course, the DJI drone is made in China, and I guess much like that rocket that came down this weekend, it came home. We're glad the Chinese rocket ended up out in the Indian Ocean. Thank goodness for that. And I'm glad that DJI drone made its way back home to me. It did it perfectly. I hit the home button when I saw what was going on, and it just came right back and landed, I would say, within a few inches of where it took off from. And then I closed out that other map, and then I created a new one, and then it worked pretty good. Well, it actually worked great after that. So it's just, it was an operator error. Now, you've worked a lot with those. You used the Phantom Pro 4 or 4 Pro, I believe, too. And you've done quite a bit of mapping or orthomosaic or whatever any of the fancy words are for it. But for your case, a lot of what you're doing out there is agriculture stuff.
Yeah, and a little bit of recreational also. Sure. But it's pretty simple what we do because it's using a program that is designed for mapping fields. So all you do is you just pull up Google Earth map and mark the corners or the boundary of the field, and it decides where it's going to go from there, if it's going to take on the long rounds or the short rounds or where you want it to be. And then it also is the wind direction and the wind speed determines some of what you do too, because you don't want to fly with a side wind because it tips it, and then you get pictures that aren't straight down. Mm-hmm. So it tries to fly into the wind, and that's kind of fun because it slows down quite a bit when it's going into the wind, and it goes like heck when it comes back. And so that's pretty much all we do with it, is just map a field. It takes a whole bunch of pictures. You upload the pictures, and then Drone Deploy stitches it all together into a real high-quality picture that you can look at your crop conditions in.
Yeah, and you can drag it across your screen, so you can. It's not like a video where you'd have to go, fast forward or fast backwards or whatever. You can just grab that picture, pull it to wherever you want, and then you can even scroll in on it. And if you've got a decent enough camera on your drone, you can, and it's got plenty of megapixels, you can expand that, and you can actually get some awfully good pictures, to the point I've heard people being able to see a kitty cat out in the field sometimes.
Yeah, well, I have done that. And it just happened. We were looking at a map trying to decide which direction it was seated, because we were told that when you went a certain direction, this drill was not seating. And so we were looking for skips and so on, and when you start looking, here's a cat out there. Also used it to chase a cat with one day. I was flying it home, and the cat was walking, and he could hear it, and I couldn't stand it, so I went back because he was just clinging to the ground when it flew over.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of lowered it a little bit lower and a little bit lower. I chased him out of the field and back home. It wasn't that far.
That's pretty cool you're able to do that, because I imagine, he's lost amongst the vegetation and that sort of thing. He doesn't know where the heck to go. And you moved him out just like Marlin Perkins might have way back in the 60s with a zebra or something like that. That's a good deed. Good deed done. Dave, you got anything else for us this week?
Just want to wish all the mothers out there happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
And just keep hoping for that elusive rain.
That sounds good to me. Dave, you have a great day, and thank you so much. There he is, Dave Nelson, out at Rural Reflections West. I'm Grant Nelson here, Rural Reflections East at the studio of Thief River Falls Radio, and this is the Rural Reflections Podcast.